We're now going to have Alexandra Raga, who will talk about, Conrad referred to certainly worse thieves than the fellow he pictured in his photograph. And I think Alexandra is going to talk to us about worse thieves.
So I've spent my whole career working on anti-bribery and good governance, except for 2 years that I spent at FIFA, where I failed to work on anti-bribery and good governance. I'm actually really optimistic. We've heard some very sad and grim statistics, but this is how change gets started. I've been with Trace since the beginning, 15 years, and we worked with the principles that if you had the right coalition of people and an issue that people could get behind, an issue that people could be compassionate about, and one that you could use as a pressure point on a lot of companies, then you could see real change fairly quickly. Now, it's pretty sluggish in the beginning, but it picks up very quickly when the companies that are holding back and waiting to see what happens, the companies that don't want to take a leadership role, start jumping on the bandwagon very quickly. So the early days can be frustrating and slow, but it takes a few good actors to continue to lead the way, and when that happens, real change is possible. So Trace is an anti-bribery organization, and I want to talk for a moment about not the very specific issues of what we do, but how the model can work. And I think we've heard a little bit about this, but I think the three most important principles are working in concert, best practices, and then these pressure points that I talked about. And best practices become increasingly important, and it's why an event like this is really fantastic, because there are often, you're charting new territory, right? There are often no clear standards, and the alternative to no clear standards is this incredible proliferation of standards where there are too many. And in the early days of the anti-bribery effort, about 15 years ago, it was longer ago than that in the United States, but only because their law came into being in the 1970s, the companies would get very frustrated and say, we want to do the right thing, just tell us what to do. Tell us what's working, what isn't working, what other companies are doing. They want to be in the middle of the pack, right? They want to understand what best practices are so they can roll out best practices. Corporations are by nature risk averse, and what they want to do is be in the middle of that pack so that they're not being flagged by Greenpeace on the one hand, or they're not being anti-business on the other hand, because all of these efforts, of course, come with a cost. It's a cost well worth investing, but there is a cost associated with. So working with some of these principles, I think, can reassure corporations. And then what you get is an ally. The corporations become an ally as they push the standards down through their supply chain. And that's really when this gets very powerful, because the corporations have the money and usually the political will to make that initial investment. But the whole supply and marketing chain that they work with generally doesn't. So what happens is once companies have honed these tools, they can make them available to their supply chain. So to give you a quick example, we do due diligence for major multinational companies, everybody operating seriously internationally. As a multinational has to know who their third parties are, and we do due diligence on those third parties. But it can't end there. So the training that we make available to the multinationals, we then make available at no charge to those SMEs, those small and medium-sized enterprises that are all the way down the supply chain. And it's an incredibly norm-changing process, right? Back in the day, 15 years ago, when Trace started, people would sit at the back of the room and cross their arms and roll their eyes and talk about how we were terribly naive, and there was a lot of cynicism around this. But norms change through this sort of educational process, and as soon as multinationals start saying to their supply chain, it matters to us that you embrace these issues, it is a competitive advantage that you embrace these issues, they'll embrace the issues. There is a business advantage to them, and they'll get on board. So some organizations will get on board for the right reasons, humanitarian reasons, reputational reasons, and others will just because it brings with it an incredible business a business advantage. And being able to identify, and using standards like we're talking about here today, being able to identify the organizations that are committed to these issues is important. I applaud David's effort in bringing everybody together and his really generous impulse to build a coalition around this issue, because as we've heard from piracy and fisheries and the ship breaking yards and that sort of thing, there's a real diversity of stakeholders in this, but with a common purpose. And I think if we can get the multinationals more clarity around where they can help, where they can improve the situation in a cost-effective, sane manner, then you're going to find champions very quickly. Three themes for corporations, and when we speak to companies, I find that these resonate in various different ways depending on your audience. Of course, the humanitarian issue, and when we're talking about supply chain to companies on land, we're talking about buildings collapsing, about pharmaceutical products that are tainted, not just inert, but tainted, getting onto the local market, and you can tackle this on that humanitarian front. The second, of course, is reputational, and that's a powerful message for the right people at companies. I travel constantly, and when I go into a country, I always ask the taxi drivers, who are the good actors in the business community here? And they all have names. They'll all throw out names. I have no idea if they're accurate or not, but it reminds people that reputation is really sticky, that if you are a Siemens that had an incredible bribery scandal 8 years ago, people in these local communities are still talking about Siemens, that bribing company, that bribe-paying company. So avoiding that kind of negative reputational stickiness is extraordinarily valuable. But then the final one really is the economic advantage. From a bribery perspective, there's an enormous amount of money lost to bribery. If you make it clear that your company is the sort of company that'll pay bribes, then you wake up the next morning and throw open the curtains and there will be a long queue of government officials with their hand out because you have marked yourself as complicit in what is in fact an international crime. In the same way with customs officials, port authorities, immigration officials, all of these people who are needed to help violate human rights, that is, the people who are paid off to look the other ways, people start paying them and the payments never stop, and you're not allowed to then stand up and express outrage because the people that you bribed behaved badly. You have to identify the good actors and work in concert with others to ensure that they're being identified and singled out. You can almost always, there are very few countries where you can't find someone up the food chain in the government who will help you if you go in as a coalition, help you with the customs officials, the health officials, and others. Now, there are some states that are just utterly lawless, and in that case, very often we see companies band together in a private sector coalition to go in and see what they can do. So very quickly, how can companies avoid corruption? There's some obvious steps that can be taken, but all of these are just underscoring that normative value of saying the same message, saying it forcefully, backing up with international organizations, having a few corporate champions who are able to stand up and say, we are willing to do this, we've done this, we survived it. Trace is a nonprofit membership organization. Shipping and logistics is our fourth largest community. We work with Maersk and all of the major logistics companies, and they are getting more fearless about this issue. They are understanding that the reputational bump that they get from this is worth the risk that they take in embracing the issue. But ensuring that there are clear policies, ensuring that those policies are made available to everybody in the supply chain. A lot of these little organizations don't have in-house counsel, don't have people who can draft the policies and train on these policies. If a company is going in country to do training on some of these issues at a port or otherwise, invite SMEs, make it available to others in the community. Even we see companies inviting local government officials and saying, just sit in on this and hear what the international community is saying about the local market. It can be incredibly powerful. We have a database of language like that, anti-bribery language, good governance model policies. It's all available at no charge, and we're happy to make some of that available. We have a new shipping team within Trace that works, again, very specifically on anti-bribery, not human rights, but the nexus between the two, I think, is beyond dispute, and we are sort of standing by to use the best practices that we have found work with multinationals in whatever way best supports the initiative that is taking root here. Thank you very much.